The island was supposed to be deserted, or at least, that was the assumption. Shimizu Kento had earned a significant amount of money and used it to purchase the island. He had moved there alone, intending to escape the crowds. That was the plan, until he discovered an unconscious girl with pointed ears. At first, Kento wiped his face, wondering if he was imagining things, but he soon realized the girl was real. Concerned that she might be entangled in something dangerous, he also couldn't help but notice her pointed ears. After briefly admiring her appearance, he quickly returned to his senses and approached her to see if she was all right. In a weak voice, the girl apologized and asked for water. Kento immediately got up and rushed to fetch a bottle. Once back, he helped her sit up so she could drink, supporting her until she was able to drink on her own. After she finished, Kento asked whether she could understand what he was saying and if she was feeling calmer. She nodded in response and thanked him for the water, which made Kento let out a sigh of relief. He then inquired about her presence on the island. Looking away, she replied that she didn't know and that the place was unfamiliar to her. Since the island was uninhabited and located in Japan, Kento asked if she was aware of that. Nervously, she admitted that she had never heard those words before and asked who he was. Kento introduced himself as someone living on the island and asked for her name. She replied that she was Elise and identified herself as an elf. With introductions complete, Kento asked how she had arrived there, and Elise explained that she had blacked out after reaching the final floor of a dungeon. She added that when she came to, she found herself on the island. After walking along the shoreline and finding nothing, she eventually collapsed from fatigue. Curious, Kento asked about the dungeon, and she described it as a labyrinth teeming with monsters, located underground. The monsters would kill anything that entered and absorb their energy to recover. Elise explained that by defeating these creatures, one could acquire items called magic stones. This gave rise to a profession known as hunters, and she was one of them. Kento, pondering her words, commented that such things didn't exist in his world, which shocked Elise as she realized the kind of place she had ended up in. He then pointed out that standing around while talking wasn't the best idea and suggested they move somewhere more comfortable to continue the conversation. Kento asked if she was able to walk, and Elise replied that she wasn't hurt, so she could at least move by herself. She then got dressed, and as she did, Kento looked at her, which puzzled Elise, prompting her to ask if something was on her face. He quickly denied it. He explained that he was simply relieved she appeared to be okay, which put his mind at ease. Kento informed her that his house wasn't far, they just needed to walk a short distance, and he would guide her there. After walking for a bit, despite Elise growing weary, Kento finally showed her his house, nestled among some trees along the beach. He welcomed her into his home, and Elise commented that, for a house located deep in the wilderness, she had imagined something quite different, but it turned out to be far better than she had expected. Kento chuckled at her remark, saying he personally liked that kind of home, and that she was free to be honest with her thoughts. Smiling, Elise asked if that was really okay, as she wouldn't hold back, and Kento laughed, replying that he preferred that over her being afraid of him. Now that she was there, it would be impolite not to offer her something to eat, so he said he would cook and asked her to take a seat while she waited. When Elise tasted the meal, she was thrilled. It was delicious. She said it was the first time she had eaten bread that was so soft. In her world, bread tended to be dark, hard, and stale. Kento realized then that both the culture and everything from her world must be entirely different. On that note, he brought up that he had seen her carrying a bow, though without any arrows. Elise explained that she used magic to create arrows, which was why she didn't carry any with her. Kento thought about that and asked if a human like him could also use that kind of magic. Elise responded that there probably wouldn't be any issue with it. Kento laughed, saying he'd like to know how it worked, and she told him she didn't mind showing him how it functioned if he was interested. Elise then stood up and created a magical arrow right in front of Kento, placing it on the table. He was visibly surprised and asked whether it was just an illusion. She assured him it was real and said that as long as a person had mana in their body, it was possible. For some reason, she added, this world also had mana. Kento was stunned to hear that, but gradually began to make sense of the situation, and then asked her for a favor. He said he wouldn't mind if Elise stayed there for some time, but in return, he wanted to learn a bit of magic. Elise answered that she didn't mind at all, but she wanted to confirm if it was really alright for her to just live there, especially since he had already helped her a lot. Kento replied that if it meant he could become the world's first mage, then it was more than worth it. He guessed she must be tired as well, so he said he would get a bath ready for her. Later, while preparing the fireplace inside the house, Kento was still struggling to believe he had met someone from another world in his own. The situation felt completely unreal. Once everything was ready, he returned to let Elise know. She remarked that he had taken a long time, and he explained that, since the island was far from any cities, the bath had to be heated manually, and he also needed to draw water from the well. In appreciation, Elise offered to help by fetching water the next day, which made Kento happy. Elise had already done that kind of work many times in her own world, so it was nothing new to her, and Kento thanked her for the kind gesture. He then told her that once she got to the changing area, she could take off her clothes and enter the bath. Elise was surprised at how large the space was for someone living alone, but she started undressing anyway. Kento quickly turned around and covered his face, shouting and asking why she was undressing right there. Casually, Elise replied that she was going to take a bath, but Kento insisted that she should only do that when he wasn't looking. Putting that aside, he explained to her how to use shampoo for her hair and soap for her body, and how to operate the lever to get hot water. The water came from a tank, so he asked her not to use too much. Elise remarked that he really had all the proper items for bathing, but agreed with what he said. So, Elise began her bath and picked up the items provided, but she wasn't sure which one was which, since in her world, using such products wasn't common. Because of that, she called out to Kento. When he came to check what was wrong, he froze the moment he saw that she was still undressed. Covering his face, he asked why she was stepping out of the bathroom like that, and she answered that it was because she didn't know how to use the shampoo. Kento asked her to wrap herself in a towel, and then demonstrated how to press the bottle until the liquid came out. Still, despite being in the middle of teaching her, Kento felt extremely tense due to how close she was, and he hurried out soon after. Elise, not fully understanding why, simply thanked him for the explanation, while Kento sighed on the other side of the door, finding the whole situation hard to believe. Eventually, Elise entered the bathtub and softly commented that the water was quite hot, though she seemed to be enjoying the bath nonetheless. Later on, she came out of the bathroom and thanked him, saying that the bath had been very refreshing. Kento asked whether she had liked it, and she agreed, saying it felt really good. He then asked her to come with him so he could show her the bedroom, which once again left Elise surprised. Not only was the bathroom large, the bedroom was also spacious. Kento mentioned that his own room was located on the opposite side of the hallway. That way, if anything happened, she could call for him if she needed to. After that, he left, and the two of them spent the night sleeping in separate rooms. The following morning, Elise was still trying to come to terms with the fact that she had truly arrived in another world. She went downstairs to greet Kento, who asked her if she had slept well. She responded that she slept like a rock, which made him feel relieved. He mentioned he was planning to fetch water after breakfast and offered her a cup of coffee. Elise asked if the well was nearby, and Kento told her it was located behind the house. However, as expected, his clothes were too big for an elf like her. Regardless, the two of them went to the well, and Kento explained that she could draw water using the pump. He told her that if she moved the lever, the water would start flowing. When Elise tried it out, she was amazed that it actually worked, but in the process, she slipped and got wet. Seeing this, Kento rushed over to check if she was okay and helped her up, somewhat surprised by her clumsiness despite everything. He then suggested she take a bath so she wouldn't catch a cold from staying wet. Meanwhile, Kento was planning to go shopping in the capital. After all, Elise had come from a different world and would need many essential items. Kento himself had been thrown off by the situations Elise found herself in, though she seemed unaware of any of it or simply didn't care. He told her that the towel was in the same place as before, and once again, Elise began undressing in front of him. Kento immediately rushed out of the house, leaving her in charge while he was away. To properly deal with everything, he needed to buy her clothes. Whenever he needed something, he would go to the capital, for which he had acquired a boat. Still, he never imagined he would one day be using that boat just to buy clothing. Then he remembered, he also needed to buy underwear. Back at home, Elias opened the refrigerator and was surprised to find that things inside actually stayed cold. She also tried using the hairdryer, excited to discover that there were all kinds of useful technologies in this world. It truly was a completely different place. Sitting in the living room, Elias thought about all the new things she needed to learn and remember here, smiling as she did. She wondered where Kento might be at the moment and decided it was time to get dressed, so she wouldn't remain in that state any longer. Meanwhile, Kento was struggling. He had gone through quite an ordeal, dealing with the embarrassment of buying clothes for Elias and being judged from every direction. Later that day, when he finally returned home looking completely worn out, Elias came to greet him and noticed that he had bought a lot of items. Most of the items Kento had brought back were meant for Elias. Since he wasn't sure what her preferences were, he thought they could go through everything together to make sure. As she began trying on the clothes, Elias asked if all the clothing in this world was this form-fitting. Kento replied that he didn't really know much about women's fashion. Elias seemed surprised because, in her opinion, considerations like that should be made when choosing what to wear. She picked up the bag containing the underwear and asked what it was, prompting Kento to grab her by the shoulders and tell her not to touch it. However, during that moment, through some strange stroke of luck, she tripped, causing Kento to fall on top of her. He immediately jumped back and apologized. He quickly asked if she was all right, and Elias nodded silently, her expression unchanged. Kento then explained that the bag contained underwear for her to wear, and that she should look through it once she was back in her room. Along with the clothes, Kento had also brought some books and planned to teach her how to read the rest of the language later on. But Elias was just staring at him, while he questioned whether he really deserved everything that had been happening. Kento reminded her that, just as he had said before, she was also returning the favor by teaching him magic, so in the end, things were balanced. He added that if he really could become the world's first mage, that would be incredible. And if Elias wanted to stay there for good, he wouldn't have a problem with it. After all, he enjoyed having someone to talk to. Elias laughed, commenting that he really did seem to be in a good mood. That settled it. Kento then said he would go prepare something to eat, and in the meantime, she could head upstairs and try on the underwear. Elias agreed and went to her room to examine the underwear of this world, quickly realizing that it actually fit her perfectly. Suddenly, she called out to Kento and ran to him, full of excitement, though he had no idea why. Elias was clearly thrilled, exclaiming how amazing this thing called science was. She asked how people had figured out the composition of air, or how they discovered something called gravity. She was eager to learn all about these unfamiliar concepts. The more she found out, the more the history of this world amazed her. That was when she noticed that Kento was looking at her, and he laughed, saying that she reminded him of a child when she got excited like that. Elias looked a little embarrassed, and Kento quickly tried to justify himself, but she didn't seem to mind at all and simply agreed with him. After all, experiencing all of this for the first time made her feel like a curious child again. She hadn't seen much outside of the island, but just thinking about how much more there was to discover filled her with happiness. Kento agreed with her and suggested that next time, they could go together. There was so much more for her to explore. Elias asked with excitement if they really could do that, while Kento, in turn, was relying on her to teach him magic. Later on, the protagonist went out to tend to the crops, checking to make sure there were no insects. Everything appeared to be in perfect condition. Elias remarked that he seemed to be enjoying himself, and he replied that he had always liked doing things by himself since childhood. To Elias, it wasn't clear how that could be fun. Maybe it was something she'd have to try for herself before judging. She walked over to him and asked if he could teach her how he did it because she wanted to learn about agriculture in this world. Besides, Elias added that she couldn't let him have all the fun alone. Kento gestured that he could manage on his own and claimed he wasn't exactly a master at teaching. Even so, Elias insisted that it was fine. He still knew much more than she did. That was when Kento noticed just how determined she really was. That was the point he had wanted to make, but it wasn't something they could just jump into. First, she needed to check that the plants were in good health. By watching them grow through her own efforts and care, She might begin to understand why Kento found it so enjoyable. Elise thought about it and admitted that it was true, she wouldn't be able to do it instantly. So, she chose one plant to take care of personally. Kento agreed and reminded her not to give up midway, and Elise, slightly annoyed, reminded him that she wasn't a child and promised to care for it until the very end. Kento found it amusing to watch Elise's expressions change like that. Later on, during his magic lessons, Elise explained that there was a type of magic used to enchant objects, enhancing their performance. Other forms of magic could transform into elemental forces like fire or water, and there was also a type used to summon things, such as magical arrows. What all these types of magic had in common was the requirement to release mana independently from the body. The first step was to check whether Kento had an invisible compartment within him that could be used to store mana, so she asked him to stay still. Eventually, Elise congratulated him. He had a visible compartment, which meant he was capable of using magic. As long as he had that, he could circulate mana throughout his body. From there, it was just a matter of directing the flow to specific points. Doing so would enhance his physical capabilities. Elise then demonstrated by performing an enormous jump using mana. Kento was completely shocked by this. Elise told him that if he focused the mana in his arms or legs, he could do the same. Normally, that would drastically increase one's physical strength. To help him visualize it, she guided him to imagine mana moving through his veins, like blood. She moved behind him to assist, telling him to relax and picture himself moving his limbs. But then Elise asked what was wrong, because Kento had suddenly stopped. He explained that maybe they were standing a bit too close. She apologized and asked if that made him uncomfortable. Kento clarified that it wasn't that, he was just a little nervous being that near. Regardless, Elise continued, encouraging him to at least try once and see the result. Kento agreed, saying he would attempt it now, but asked her to step back a little first. When he finally tried, Kento was taken completely off guard. He had actually done it. But during the jump, he hit his head on a branch and fell. Elise ran over and asked if he was okay, and Kento laughed, surprised that he could jump so high on his very first try. Elise noted that with time and repeated use, he would naturally learn how to control his enhanced abilities. His invisible compartment must be fairly large, considering how powerful his first attempt was. Kento asked if that was a good thing, and Elise explained that the larger the compartment, the more mana it could store for future use. That meant in time, he would be able to cast much stronger spells for longer durations. In other words, he had great potential. Kento started to feel like he was beginning to understand what magic really was. Using mana didn't seem as hard as he first thought. Elise told him that now that he could release mana, they would eventually need to adjust his training depending on the type of mana he had. She would help with that, so he should try using mana for a variety of tasks throughout the day. She had been worried that he might not be able to synchronize his breathing with mana release. However, since the house was surrounded by mana, that wouldn't be an issue. When Elise thought about how much mana was present and how she ended up in that location, she began to suspect that there might be a dungeon nearby. Kento asked if that was dangerous, given that dungeons usually contained monsters, and Elise answered that monsters normally couldn't leave the dungeon. Still, Elise felt compelled to go and check it out. In the meantime, Kento should stay focused on his training. With no good counterargument, the protagonist agreed, and she told him she would scout the area. Elise went to patrol the island, and as expected, even after searching thoroughly, she was only able to cover part of the area. The strongest concentration of mana was in that region, and it didn't take long before she discovered what looked like a dungeon entrance. At first, she assumed it was just a small cave, but it turned out to be part of an extensive system. It was highly unusual for a dungeon to exist in this world. If there were demons inside, it could lead to serious problems. Suddenly, Elise noticed a glow. The dungeon was producing an immense amount of magical energy. It was both miraculous and dangerous. Acting quickly, she created a seal and closed off the entrance, believing that things would be fine as long as the seal held. Meanwhile, Kento continued his training, beginning to grasp how mana flowed through the body. Elise returned and asked how it was going. Kento said he was steadily improving, and she told him that, just as she had suspected earlier, there really was a dungeon nearby. Kento took that as a sign that he should step up his training. Still, Alice reassured him that there was no need to worry just yet. Nothing would happen with the dungeon for now. However, they would need to come up with a plan, because the presence of a dungeon could have unpredictable consequences in this world. Even so, Alice wasn't going to let Kento push himself too hard. For the time being, she told him to stay away from the dungeon. Kento asked if it was possible for him to go inside, and Alice warned him that she wasn't sure what might happen. It was certainly possible, but she didn't recommend it. Kento wanted to understand the situation better, especially since he had recently purchased the island. Alice said she understood and promised to take him there once he had gained more experience with magic. Some monsters could emerge from things like trees or rocks, and since the island had plenty of both, there was always a risk. She had sealed the entrance to the cave, but that would only serve as a temporary barrier. Then, Alice handed Kento a piece of paper. It was a list of items they would need in order to explore the dungeon. She intended to have him buy those supplies during his next trip to the mainland. There was a limit to how far they could progress inside a dungeon, even with magic, so having the proper tools would be necessary. Kento agreed, realizing that they wouldn't find those things just by staying on the island. Still, it worked out well. He had already planned to take his boat in for maintenance, and since that would take a full day, he suggested they go together. Alice asked if that would be all right, pointing out that an elf might attract too much attention, so Kento gave her a hat. He had bought it previously for the specific purpose of hiding her ears, and he asked her to try it on and see if she liked it. When Alice put the hat on, Kento complimented her, saying it looked great. She was genuinely happy, especially knowing he had even picked out clothes for her. Kento explained that he had chosen the clothes with the thought that, someday, she might go out with him. While Alice was distracted in her happiness, he asked her to help him with the preparations. Kento could tell how excited she was, but he knew she would discover even more incredible things over time. Alice agreed. She was looking forward to all of it. There was still so much she didn't know, so she had to keep learning. From that point on, Alice continued trying on clothes and studying, using a tablet Kento gave her to look at different outfits and to learn. She kept experimenting until she came across a piece of underwear that she didn't understand how to wear. It had been in the bag, so she assumed she was supposed to put it on underneath her clothing. Even after examining it for a while, Alice still didn't know its purpose. She decided to ask Kento about it the next day. For now, she was far too excited to worry about something as minor as clothing. The next morning, Alice came downstairs and remarked, as usual, that he always woke up early. Kento replied that it had become a habit. Since there was no one else on the island to help him, he was used to waking up early and doing everything alone. Laughing, Alice joked that no one was going to make his breakfast for him, but she also said that the food in this world was always delicious. Kento told her that even the vegetables they were growing could be turned into delicious meals, which caught her attention. He promised that one day he'd teach her how to cook, but first, they needed to focus on their plans for the day. Kento was thinking of taking Alice on a walk around the main island. After that, they could drop off the boat for repairs and visit some of the places she was interested in. Alice was so excited that she could barely contain it, but before they left, he asked her to help by fetching water from the well. She still hadn't gotten used to using magic for such tasks, and that was when Kento suddenly froze. Alice had caught his attention. She wasn't wearing any underwear to cover her chest, and she asked if that was the item she hadn't known how to wear. She had planned to ask him how to put it on, but even so, he asked her not to do things like that in front of him. Kento told her to wait in her room while he handled everything else, sighing heavily as he sat down, practically forcing her out of the kitchen. He was constantly looking at her like that. It wouldn't hurt if she tried to imagine things from his perspective now and then, but that didn't seem to occur to her. Eventually, after trying for a while, Alice successfully figured out how to wear the underwear. Then the two of them went out together to collect water. Alice asked if he usually fetched water like that, and Kento responded that there should still be enough for now, but since their usage had increased, he was making more trips than before. All the water they used came from a tank located behind the house. The system stored electricity and charged batteries using solar panels and wind power. There wasn't any gas available on the island, so they relied on electricity for heating water and cooking. Meanwhile, Elise wasn't sure what to do. She couldn't decide where they should go first. That's when Kento asked if he could come in. He wanted to know if she was ready so they could leave. When she was prepared, Elise came out and met Kento, apologizing for making him wait. But it turned out to be worth it. She looked stunning in ordinary clothes. With her ears hidden, she resembled a foreigner. Everything looked good on her. With that, Kento said it was time to go, and Elise mentioned that she would like to see the architecture of this world. Since they were heading to the main island, it seemed like the perfect opportunity. Kento agreed, saying that seeing it in person would be very different from just reading about it. He also hoped they'd be able to find the equipment for exploring the dungeon, but they could think about that later and enjoy the trip for now. When they arrived at the boat, Elise was clearly amazed. Kento offered to let her stay up on the deck if she liked, though it was a bit cluttered. But before he could finish, she interrupted him and asked to see everything inside. He told her she could walk around as she pleased. Elise thanked him and eagerly ran off to explore the runes scattered throughout the ship. She was very impressed. Even though it was just a boat, the runes here were far more advanced than those from her world. Kento asked if she had already seen everything, and Elise replied that she had. Being able to travel comfortably while admiring the beauty of the ocean was something she had never imagined possible back in her world. Kento asked if she had ever traveled by boat in her previous world, and she explained that the seas were ruled by monsters there. Even if someone wanted to sail, it wasn't an option. They didn't have the technology to build vessels of this size, and very few people had the courage to even attempt sea travel. Elise had already encountered so many surprises in this new world, and it seemed like there were still many more ahead. Then Kento mentioned that they'd be riding in a car once they got to the port, so more surprises were coming. Elise excitedly asked if he was referring to the vehicles that moved through the cities, and he confirmed it. It was clear that she really wanted to see a car. She was thrilled, and so they continued their journey until they reached the port, where she noticed how busy and crowded the area was. Kento explained that it was because this beach area was commonly used for boats and marine sports. It was probably nothing like what she had pictured. Still, it was completely different from anything she was used to. And since there were no monsters in the water here, she could swim without being afraid. Kento admitted that he felt a bit envious. In her world, not being able to swim in the ocean was hard to imagine. Now he understood why Elise had just walked along the beach that day instead of swimming, because it was still a dangerous idea for her. They got into a car. Elise had seen cars on TV before, but riding in one was an entirely new experience. She asked if he couldn't go any faster. Kento laughed and explained that unfortunately, this was as fast as he could legally drive. She was a little disappointed, but then decided to take off her hat for a bit and enjoy the view through the window. Aside from her pointed ears, she looked just like anyone else in this world. However, the differences in mindset and culture were significant. This world was truly a completely different place, and they eventually arrived at what, in his world, would be considered a grand castle. Kento told her that this particular one had been built long ago. Elise didn't know much about this world yet, but the construction style of the buildings gave her a sense of comfort. In her original world, the technology had barely advanced beyond what was available when the temples were constructed, and Kento realized that meant it was about on par with Japan's Edo period. If more elves ever found themselves in this world, they would undoubtedly be stunned before long. As they continued walking together, Elise's hat suddenly blew off, but Kento quickly chased it down and placed it back on her head. He asked if she was all right, and she nodded. Since everything happened so suddenly, no one should have seen her ears. For now, they decided to head back, and Kento felt relieved that no one seemed to notice what had happened or paid any special attention. Elise apologized for not realizing that her hat had flown off. She must have been too distracted by her surroundings. The truth was, Kento had wanted to go out and buy the tools for exploring the dungeon, but he figured they could just leave that for the next day. She replied that there was no need to rush. She had really enjoyed the day, so she was satisfied. Kento was glad to hear that the outing had been worth it. He said goodnight and returned to his room, reminding her that she could call him if she needed anything. Elise decided to take a bath first, and afterward, she went back to her room, lay down, and went to sleep. The next day, the two of them went out shopping, and Elise became completely fixated on something called pudding that she saw in the store. The protagonist laughed as she got excited over those kinds of things, and they ended up buying everything that caught her attention. Elise began to feel concerned because it seemed like they had bought too much, but Kento told her it was fine, they'd have enough desserts to last a while. The only thing missing now was the gear they needed for the dungeon. They could head to a hardware store to look for it. Elise asked if they'd really be able to find everything they needed there, and Kento replied that it was very likely. When they got to the hardware store, Elise was amazed at how many different types of things were for sale and asked what kind of store it was. Kento explained that it was a place that sold all kinds of useful items for everyday life. She found a sheet of metal that was pretty small, but Kento told her they could probably find a bigger one somewhere else, as he doubted a store like that would carry larger ones. Still, Elise said they might as well take it. There was no need to go searching all over. She also picked up an axe, since the sheet was too small and they needed something that could offer more reach. There didn't seem to be anything else they needed. Elise realized that, after all, it wasn't a weapon store. As they were leaving, she misstepped and Kento caught her just in time. She thanked him for helping, but he turned his eyes away. After all, she had ended up in an awkward position, and he told her not to worry about it. But Elise moved even closer, asking if he was okay. That only made the situation more uncomfortable for Kento, and he finally decided that they might as well wrap things up and rely on what they had. They also grabbed some protective construction equipment, gloves, helmets, and boots. There was no guarantee it would all fit properly, but it was better to be cautious. They could also grab some food, maybe canned goods or something similar. Anything would do, as long as they had something to eat. As long as they had food, the only thing left was to master magic, and they'd be able to go in and out of the dungeon safely. Kento planned to return the car when they got back to the port, so he told Elise she could rest for now. She agreed, since she was feeling a bit tired. Kento had expected that, considering they'd done quite a bit of walking. A little while later, the protagonist came back only to find Elise fast asleep. That made him smile as he decided that it was time for them to head home. Once back, Elise was in the middle of undressing when she called out to Kento, asking him to come over because she couldn't manage to get dressed by herself and needed help. Once again, Kento found himself in an awkward situation. Although Elise didn't seem to understand his reactions, he ended up agreeing to help. She was trying to cover herself more, which probably meant that she was getting more accustomed to the clothing customs of this world. So Kento helped her get dressed and asked if everything was tied up correctly. Elise thanked him, saying it was good enough. A little while later she was finally ready, and the protagonist smiled, feeling a sense of nostalgia from seeing those clothes again. Elise said she wanted to avoid getting her usual clothes dirty, so she figured it would be better to wear those for now while getting ready. Apparently, she couldn't wear underwear with the outfit she had chosen for going into the dungeon, so she decided to leave it off for now. Elise said it was easier to move in something she was already used to, so they could go ahead and proceed toward the dungeon. When they got to the place, Kento noticed that the entrance looked quite different from how she had described it. Elise had made some modifications the last time she visited. Since then, the dungeon had been radiating a significant amount of mana. Kento asked what the items she brought were for, and Elise explained they were a first aid kit to treat any injuries they might suffer. She added that this was also a good spot to rest if needed. The injuries would have to be minor for the kit to be effective. Kento chuckled because she always said such odd things, but if they got seriously hurt, she showed him they had potions. Those were the only potions they had. Since Elise couldn't create more, they should only be used in life or death circumstances. Still, having potions didn't mean they could lower their guard. Kento thanked her for being cautious, but reminded her the potions belonged to her, so she should decide when to use them. Elise had no intention of abandoning an ally. It was for both of their sakes. Since she had gone to the trouble of saying all this, he promised he'd stay vigilant. She also said that if something dangerous happened, she would do her best to protect him. Hearing that was better than anything to Kento, as Elise wanted to avoid using potions unless absolutely necessary. The two then entered the dungeon. Kento remarked that at first glance, it just looked like an ordinary cave, but there was definitely a different atmosphere inside. Elias said that was to be expected since it was his first time being surrounded by so much mana. Besides, a cave with light at the end was unusual. Artificial dungeons like this had lights inside. They could follow the lights without needing to carry their own. The presence of lights meant the dungeon was deep, so Elias told Kento to stay behind her and talk less. This way, they could at least keep the element of surprise, to which Kento agreed. Even though he had entered full of anticipation, her warning made him a little nervous. After walking for some time, Elias said they must be quite deep now, but Kento still hadn't seen any monsters. It felt like they were simply exploring a regular cave. Monsters only appeared at the depths, where the mana was denser. Oddly enough, he was kind of disappointed. Suddenly, Elias signaled for him to stop and stay alert. A wooden mannequin appeared, and she explained it was a puppet-type monster, so Kento could handle it. He had already seen the results of his training and could fight it without trouble. Kento agreed they should take action. Elias said she would handle the monster if he failed. He hadn't been seen in action yet. That was all she said, but to his surprise, the puppet monster immediately noticed him. It was surprisingly agile for a mere doll. Suddenly, Elias shouted his name, and he quickly launched an attack. At that moment, the puppet fell, and Kento sighed in relief. Elias praised him for reacting swiftly despite making a mistake. It was a good chance to learn how to fight even after errors. He'd have to be prepared for such situations from now on. Kento wished he'd been warned earlier, and then a small stone appeared, which Elias crouched to pick up. Kento asked what it was, and she explained it was the crystal a monster leaves behind after defeat. The stronger the monster, the more beautiful and valuable the crystal. Such crystals didn't exist in Kento's world, so to him, it was just a glowing rock. Suddenly, Elias noticed something and pointed for Kento to look. It was the same smoke that appeared when the monster vanished earlier. When monsters died, they were covered in black mist until they revived, so Kento reached out his hand. But Elias stopped him, saying it was fine. She could handle it, since they didn't know what might happen. To Kento's surprise, the puppet reappeared. But this time, it had a different weapon. The puppet monster still carried the same crossbow as before, but each of them had a unique weapon. Elias said Kento was unlucky and quickly shot an arrow that killed it instantly. They were fortunate to obtain a weapon this early, and Kento realized that monsters' weapons remained even after the creatures were defeated. Having already collected quite a few items, Elias suggested they head back before they encountered more monsters. But suddenly, Kento collapsed, and Elias caught him, asking what was wrong. He apologized, explaining his vision had blurred. He couldn't see anything. Feeling exhausted, Kento said he would be fine after resting, but he practically passed out on the spot. Worried, Elias knelt beside him and noticed he had developed a fever, shouting for him to wake up while trying to help. After laying him down, Elias quickly realized Kento's rapid illness was due to his body not being used to exposure to so much mana before entering the dungeon. Kento tried to sit up, saying he needed to prepare breakfast, but Elias pushed him back down, insisting he stay still while she prepared something. She even left a bottle of water nearby for him. As Kento thanked her, she decided to go out and get some food for him. He apologized for causing her so much trouble, but Elias said it was fine. Helping friends was normal. Kento smiled, realizing they truly were friends. But deep down, Elias wasn't doing this just for him. She thought any friend would do the same and paused to reflect on why it made her so happy. It had been a long time since she'd made a new friend. A little later, she returned, apologizing for the delay and asking if peaches would be okay for him to eat. Kento agreed and thanked her. Noticing something, she asked if he was okay and whether he could eat by himself. Kento said moments like this were exactly when someone should be fed since he couldn't move to do it himself. Laughing, Elias teased if his mother had been so caring that she wouldn't even let him eat on his own. Feeling flustered, Kento sat up, insisting he could manage and said he'd set the bowl aside once he finished eating.